I was a park ranger in Tennessee from 1999 to 2014. And in my line of work, I saw all kinds of strange happenings and all sorts of strange-looking animals. I loved my job, though. I thought I would never have another career, didn't plan for another career, and had no plan B, as so many people in my generation did. I was going to retire from the park ranger job, and, well, that was that. I started the job when I was 20. I grew up in the mountains of Tennessee, so I was right at home with the job, quite literally. I worked alone most of the time and was in the truck going to or from the parks for a good chunk of each day. At least 30% of my days were spent traveling in that truck. The local radio station helped pass that time, and it kept me up to date on the local news. Now, Boone and Watauga Lakes were my biggest sites, and I devoted much of my time to walking the perimeter of the lakes, the outlying trails that led to the little picnic niches and campsites. There was the usual riffraff to deal with at certain times of the year, too. And in the summer and fall, you had underage drinking and pot smoking going on. And that's the same time of year when the critters were most likely to bother campers and swimmers. There were snakes, skunks, squirrels, and crows to bother people during the day, and I had to go out more than once to rid someone's vehicle or tent of one of these animals. And at night, there were the small scavengers, the raccoons, possums, and the like, but nothing terrible. In fact, only one bear ever got close enough to have to call in animal control, and well, that was 2001. Then, in 2014, everything changed. I was up for my 15-year service recognition. Now, since 2001, everything had gone pretty well at the parks and lakes in my jurisdiction. But August of 2014 would have been my 15th year, and in late May, I found 2 dead teenagers in one of the lakes. From the moment I drove up and stepped out of my truck and saw their mutilated bodies floating by the dock, a cold chunk of lead settled in my gut, slowing my movements, numbing my body and mind. It was surreal. I called it in immediately and followed procedure. The world seemed to transform into strobing lights, sirens, and garbled CB communications after that. Until then, I had never seen a dead body. Not human, anyway. The rest of the day was lost to giving reports, telling the story over and over again. And that night, I cried. Those teenagers' bodies had been mutilated in a way that was not done by humans. And I didn't think it had been done by animals either. Now, I took the following week off of work. I barely slept at all and decided by the end of the week, the best thing for me to do was to go back to work and try to get it off my mind, at least for a few hours each day. There were several detectives and police personnel around during the month of June. The cops finally decided the most likely cause of death was a wild cat attack. I was greatly troubled about that. Now I'd seen what wild cats do to their prey. A wildcat hadn't shredded those bodies. There were many homes along the shores of Boone Lake. The owners loved the property, enjoyed the lake. The community thrived until the day the bodies turned up there. I knew a few of the homeowners personally, and knew they would never be able to live there and feel secure afterward. What exactly could I do about it? Tighten my patrols. Take a closer look at people visiting the lakes. Just be more watchful in general. And so, that's what I did. I saw just what I'd been seeing for 15 years. People enjoying the summer on the lake and having picnics and camping trips. There's nothing out of the ordinary. But I kept on high alert. Now the TVA started working at the dam. When I asked any of the TVA employees about what they were doing, they were very tight-lipped, stating that it was only a regular check of the dam. They were just making sure everything was in proper working order. I would have believed them had I not known that was complete bullshit. They had just done their regular checkup on the dam a few weeks before, right before I found the boys, as a matter of fact. My bosses would not divulge any information about the sudden flurry of activity at the dam. No one seemed to know what was going on. Now, mid-June, another body turned up in a remote part of Boone Lake, and I was the second on scene. And I was glad, because that body was torn to shreds. The blood had stained the sand on the shoreline a dull pink color, and I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman at first. Turned out, it was a man. Tucker, the first ranger on the scene, puked twice while we waited on authorities. I asked him what he thought had done so much damage to the man, and he answered by shrugging and shaking his head. Again, the world blurred with strobing lights and reality skewed with all the commotion of law enforcement, CSI team, tracking dogs, and looky-loos from nearby houses. And when the CSI team couldn't find any evidence beyond the body on the shore, everyone had to question what could have made the man look like he'd fought with a chainsaw, and of course lost. Now, at this moment, I pulled Tucker aside and I questioned him again. He said that one of the locals had called in about a monster in the lake the night before, but no one took her seriously. The complaint was never checked out. Now, at this point, Tucker looked around, pulled me closer to the woods, and confided that someone had called in a similar complaint the night before the teens turned up dead too. I'd never heard of any of that before. So I asked him, "Tuck, are you sure someone called in the night before the teens?" He nodded and sniffled loudly, and I realized he was sobbing. "Yeah, I was the one who took the call. Me and Boozer laughed about it for a long time afterward. Then we left for the night and I forgot all about it until you found those teens. I damn sure wasn't going to say anything about it then. And so I left to check the records I'd been keeping at home. It had been the days and times the TVA boys had been working at the dam, and I still hadn't been able to get a straight answer about why they were there. And looking over the records, I saw that the TVA had been working the day before each incident. Of course, they'd worked other days too. Still too little info to work with, and I needed to find out what they were doing at that dam though. I had the feeling that whatever they were doing had something to do with the victims found in the lake. That night, the workers at the dam were absent. There was no movement anywhere, and I tried to get inside the dam, but the place was locked down like it was Fort Knox. The odor wafting up from the back side of the dam reeked of dead fish and sulfur. At home, I searched online for the sulfur and dead fish smell at dams, thinking I would come up empty, but I didn't. A few years ago, there were several monster sightings at a dam in Georgia, Clark Hill Lake and Dam. The sulfur and dead fish smell had permeated the lakeside recreation area so thoroughly that people had stopped using the small public beach area that summer. There were houses along part of that shoreline at Clark Hill, just like there were at Boone Lake, and those residents lived a bit farther away than where the beach was, so they weren't bothered with the foul odor. And the government actually sent out agents to fix the monster sighting problem, and it was released in the papers that there was a giant catfish living near the dam. Nothing unusual about that, except that each time a report was made, there was a dead body in the lake the next day. And there were workers present at the dam at odd times before the monster sightings and the deaths. There were 5 total deaths in that lake. And so, I looked up the deaths as best I could, and found that the details of the 2 victims had been partially released. They had been mutilated beyond recognition. I was consumed by the similar reports up and down the eastern part of the United States. In one instance, a man was placed under arrest after trying to physically drag a park ranger to the spot where he'd been seeing a long-armed snake monster every evening for a week. No one listened to him. They laughed him off. He said the monster tried to snatch him right off the dock in front of his friend's house, and the man had 2 ragged gashes down his left side that he'd visited the emergency room for. The park ranger called in and had the man arrested for assault, and everyone thought he was crazy until a father and his small son were found mutilated near the same spot 2 days later. Something had apparently dragged them from their little boat as they drifted along their favorite fishing place. After a few incidents of death at each lake, the workers at the dam moved on and no one saw them afterward. So, the workers were precursors to the monster sightings and the eventual deaths. There had already been 2 incidents at Boone Lake, and I was determined that there wouldn't be a third. And I kept records of everything. When the workers were present at the dam, what days and times the odor seemed to be worse, who was on duty at the ranger station, who was doing drive-arounds, and who was working the phones, etc. So 3 weeks later, all my obsessions paid off. I was sitting at a picnic table at sunset a few yards from the shoreline when a young couple strolled past. They didn't seem to notice me. They were talking and holding hands. I smiled, thinking how nice it was to have someone you could be so engrossed with that you didn't notice a guy at a table a few feet away. And they strode to a dock and walked out about halfway, and then faced each other, hugging and giggling. And I closed my notebook and was getting ready to leave for the night when I heard something in the water. It was a sound that was unnatural to the environment. Something had rolled in the water. Something large. And I scanned the surface of the water and saw where the ripples were coming from, but saw no creature. And after a few minutes of nothing, I looked back to the couple. They'd walked back to the shore and seemed to be heading away from the dock. I headed for my truck, which was on the other side of the wooded area to my back. And the couple's laughter drifted on the warm breeze and reminded me of happier days when I had been a child and heard my parents laughing that way. It reminded me of sunny days, flying kites and picnics. I cleared the wooded area, spotted my truck, and a squeal broke through my reverie. Fearing the worst, I ran back toward the lake. The guy had chased the girl back to the dock and was in the process of tickling her. She squealed again. Feeling like an idiot, I walked back into the woods as the couple sank to the dock in a tangle of arms and legs. Now, I'm not a perv, but for some reason, I couldn't go without a peek of them from the woods. I had heard something in the water and the sulfur smell was light on the breeze. I thought about interrupting them to warn them away from the dock, but I didn't have time. I heard the water break again. The couple didn't notice even when the ripples ran ashore noisily, and I saw nothing that caused the disruption in the usually still water. The girl wiggled away from the guy, giggling and batting playfully at him as she scooted backward toward the water. And then, the creature surfaced, maybe 50 or 60 feet from the dock. It was huge compared to the aquatic life that was normal to Boone Lake. Its fish-like head sported 4 large nodes that blinked in the dying sunlight. All 4 eyes were trained on the couple. Its skin was black and oily as its body undulated under the surface. only its large head above the water. The thing had super thin, long arms with fins attaching them to its body, and when it spread them as if to swim, it rolled over, showing its silvery underside. It moved through the water like a spiral, with those misshapen arms reaching ever toward the dock. At this time I screamed and ran toward the dock. The shocked man and woman scrambled to turn toward me, and I yelled for them to get off the dock. There was a monster behind them. The man stood squaring off at me as I neared. The girl struggled to her feet and backed away, frightened. The monster spiraled to the end of the dock, and its long clawed fingers grasped the boards directly behind the woman's feet. The man rushed toward me and then stopped as my words finally got through to him, and he turned in time to see the thing in the water emerge and grab his girlfriend. The woman shrieked, and I ran for her. Her boyfriend froze with his mouth hanging open and his eyes wide. Darting past him, I drove for the woman's hands and managed to grab only one. The creature dragged her with such force that I was yanked over the side of the dock and into the water with her. She clawed at me, screaming wildly, and then blood filled her mouth. She coughed, convulsed, and the creature pulled her under. She was gone. Dead. I climbed to the dock and used the boyfriend's cell to call it in. He stood there like a zombie, mute, unmoving during the whole thing. Before the authorities arrived, a large boat came humming down from the direction of the dam, its large spotlight blinding us. I called for them to identify themselves and told them that there had been a murder. They couldn't enter the area. No one responded, but 2 more spotlights flipped on, lighting the water enough that I could see the blood mixing there. And then, like a giant eel, something slithered under the dock. And I saw those long clawed fingers take hold on the wood again. I ran to them, stomping at the fingers and screaming obscenities. The creature reared up, its huge fish face a foot from mine, its 4 eyes trained on me, and it opened its mouth. There were 3 rows of razor-sharp teeth across the top, and 2 along the bottom jaw. The smell was that of dead fish and sulfur and the fresh human blood, and the sulfur took my breath. The monster's head descended toward mine. Then I heard a volley of gunshots. The creature's body folded to the side as it dove, and the boat moved forward. The creature surfaced again, and the men on the boat netted it. They never spoke to me or the man on the dock with me whose girlfriend had just been murdered. They rigged up the monster and headed back in the direction of the dam. 2 days later, I was visited by a rather big, rude man who wore a suit that he seemed ill at ease in. He wore sunglasses and toted a big gun in a side holster under his suit jacket. He flashed it several times as he warned me never to speak of what I had seen at the lake. The monster was an experiment that needed to stay quiet, and they'd kill me to keep it quiet. Now, after a good-sized payoff to one of the TVA workers, I found out that the government was experimenting with gene splicing, making hybrids. I thought it was bullshit, but the reports keep surfacing. And I know what I saw, and I know what the big man in the suit told me 2 days later. His threat was real. The monster was real. Now, what the government is doing with the monsters is another question completely.